I want to hear cannons. Outfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked up. That's picked off, and who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Bucs to the 25. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew. Today on the game preview, we are talking with Andrew Fillipponi from FanDuel Radio, and we're also going to catch you up on the latest Tampa Bay Buccaneer injury news. Today, Todd Bowles ruled out 2 players for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Antoine Winfield Jr. and defensive tackle Calijah Kancey will not play this Sunday against Philly. Here is the video and the soundbite from Rick Stroud.
Kancey and Winfield are definitely out, and we'll see about Luke. And McMillan tweaked his hamstring. We'll see about him as well.
And Vita the same way?
Yes.
How did Vita look this week, just moving around?
Got better as the week went on, but we'll see.
So Luke still has to clear the concussion protocol?
Yes.
He's had kind of the normal progress you'd want to get toward that already.
Well, if it's been normal, he's been out here, he's done something. Well, we set him up some things.
Couple of notes to take away here. One of the names that popped up today was wide receiver Jalen McMillan. He tweaked his hamstring, and he said that they are still evaluating his condition. He should be a game-time decision now. So maybe Trey Palmer, if healthy, can step up in a big-time wide receiver 3 role for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because, you know, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin already popped up on the injury report. Both were limited at practice. He also mentioned that right tackle Luke Goedeke has been practicing this week, but has not cleared concussion protocol yet. Now, should get an official update on that at the latest by Saturday night. We'll know for sure if he's going to be starting for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but a potential big-time return for that offensive line that has given up quite a few sacks these last couple of weeks, even with Tristan Wirfs not playing his best. He was on the injury report this week as well, but is expected to play. Bowles also mentioned defensive tackle Vita Vea, who is questionable for the game. It was an MCL sprain for big number 50. He left the game against Detroit, and the Bucs have been thin on the interior defensive line since then. Greg Gaines, who picked up a lot of snaps, popped up on the injury report as of yesterday, and his status probably expected to play, but I don't think it would be ideal for him to play as many snaps as he has. So hopefully he gets some reinforcements in Vita Vea this week, but still a game-time decision. You don't want to rush a big guy like that back, especially with an injury like that, because it can turn something short-term, long-term very quickly, and we already know that Buccaneers defensive line needs as much help as it can get. Now, the return of Antoine Winfield Jr. and Calijah Kancey are probably still in play for Thursday night against Atlanta. It is a short week for Tampa Bay, but J.C. Allen reported earlier this week that Calijah Kancey is getting closer to making his return. Thursday night could be the night for him. Antoine Winfield Jr. been hoping for an update on him. He's been going through the motions, out there working with trainers at practice at One Buck Place. So he could definitely still be in play for Thursday night as well. So there are a collection of the latest updates on the Buccaneers injury report. Should be interesting to see who is suited up and ready to go for the Bucs and what capacity this Sunday as they host the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's dive into some more of our Week 4 coverage in our conversation with Andrew Fillipponi and FanDuel Radio.
This is FanDuel's More Ways to Win Radio across the Odyssey app, the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Loaded day of football. It all starts in a few hours. We're so happy that you have carved out some time for us today. I mentioned it is a big slate, and it starts with some 1 o'clock games that have a lot of interest, the Vikings and Packers. That's a 1 o'clock Eastern start. Green Bay, a 3-point favorite. We'll see if Jacksonville can bounce back in Houston. They're a 6.5-point dog. Jets and Broncos, 7.5-point favorite for New York. Revenge game for Andy Dalton. Panthers, a 4.5-point home underdog against Cincinnati. And the game we're going to talk about right now is in Tampa later on today. A little bit of the steam was taken out of this one when Tampa somehow inexplicably lost to Denver last week, but here we are. We're going to see a lot of the Bucs the next few weeks because they're on Thursday Night Football this week against Atlanta in a big NFC South matchup. Today, it is a repeat of last year's playoff game when they blew out the Eagles. That is their opponent today. And somehow the Eagles have found themselves a 1.5-point favorite in this game. Rhett Matthew, Cannon Fire Podcast, our guest. When we want Bucs takes, we go right to him. And we're happy to have him back on FanDuel's More Ways to Win Radio. Let's start with that line, Rhett. Your initial reaction when you found...
The line, it's been going back and forth. It seems like every time I check it, it's something different. I've seen anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5. The Bucs are playing at home here. So I think this is an interesting game for both teams just because they find themselves in an interesting spot. I feel like whoever loses this game is going to be teetering on the edge of mediocrity in the eyes of a lot of NFL fans. And I think that these are two teams that obviously want to prove that they are better than their shortcomings so far this season. And I think the most disappointing part about the Bucs loss last week against Denver is just, they were not the same team that showed up to play the Broncos as they were when they showed up to play Washington, and especially when they showed up to play the Lions on the road. It just looked like they didn't want to be there. And a lot of people felt like this team had kind of turned a corner a little bit. A lot of the hate was dying down around Todd Bowles as a head coach. And then, unfortunately, you roll out a performance like you did against Denver, and there's just not a lot of excuses left to be made. So, the Bucs hoping to prove that they are what we thought they were in the first 2 weeks of the season, but they just got to show up and be ready to play. So we hope it ends up like that wild card round matchup last year in the postseason.
Right. If you had to assign blame to either side of the ball for that flat performance against Denver, the side of the ball that needs to get that out of their system today, who would you go with, the Bucs offense or Bucs defense?
It's hard to point the finger and say one thing was the problem because from top to bottom, the team was just disgraceful. It was inexcusable last week. But, I gotta say, I think a lot of the blame is going to lie on the offense simply because after the role that they had themselves on in the first few weeks of the season, we were expecting a little more, especially, from the top. The play caller, Liam Cohen, first year as offensive coordinator here in Tampa Bay, he looked awesome those first 2 weeks. And they couldn't find any kind of rhythm, any kind of consistency on the offensive side of the ball. And the play calling was predictable at best down the stretch against the Denver team. And I mean, Sean Payton, a head coach who has a lot of experience playing the Bucs and especially matching up against Todd Bowles, he has never lost to Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay. So, I think the offensive side of the ball, it was a bad day for the offensive line. They gave up 7 sacks. It was a really bad day for Baker Mayfield because he just wasn't making the right decisions. And dare I say, he helped contribute to at least a couple of those 7 sacks that the Buccaneers gave up to Denver. So, both sides of the ball were flat. There wasn't a lot of energy anywhere. The pass rush is obviously lacking, and that's going to be a big problem down the stretch, I think, as well. But if you got to look one place, then I guess it would be the lack of offense and probably the first dud of the season for Liam Cohen as offensive play caller.
Rhett Matthew from the Cannon Fire Podcast on the Bucs and Eagles today. This is a big matchup. As Rhett pointed out, the loser of this game really is going to be wondering about itself in the big picture of the NFC. Because it would be a 2-game losing streak for Tampa, and for Philly, it would be going back to the place where they got blown out in the playoffs last year and coming home to Philly with another loss. My producers and I were talking about this before you brought you on, Rhett. There's not a game from an injury perspective that is more up in the air than this one, which is why I think we've seen that line movement that you talked about to begin the interview. We just really, even hours before the game, don't know what's going to happen with some of the biggest playmakers on the offensive side of the ball for both teams. So let's start with the Bucs running back situation here, because there does seem to be some question over whether or not Bucky Irving is going to play. The Tampa Bay rushing game, the status of it, and if Irving can't go, well, let me ask you this. If he's healthy, what role would you expect him to have in the offense today? Is he now their number one running back when healthy?
I don't think he's officially their running back one as of yet, but Todd Bowles did acknowledge, the clear difference between Rachaad White and Bucky Irving running the football. Bowles said this week to the media that Bucky's played well enough to earn a couple more reps, couple more snaps throughout the game. Now, he's not eating into the reps as much as we would like. I think when you look at the snap count, it's not quite an even pick for him and Rachaad White. Rachaad White still getting a majority of those snaps, but I do think the Bucs have some room here to get creative in the run game because it's still a work in progress. Like, Bucky Irving has an impressively high yards per carry number for a rookie over his first 3 games here so far. I think he's still averaging over 6 yards a tote on the season, which is remarkable. The Bucs have not had a back who is able to effectively carry the football that way in quite some time. Even when they had guys like Leonard Fournette on the team, he wasn't consistently that good. Bucky is showing that he can be. Now, it is going to be an interesting week just because he did pop up on the injury report, and a lot of people are concerned it's a hamstring injury. You never want to rush those back. It could be a 2-week injury that turns into a 5 or a 6-week injury if you're not careful. Oh. So Bucky says he's fine. Now, it's not a promising sign for a guy to show up one day limited at practice and then not practicing the next. But Bucky talked directly to the media. He said he feels great, and he cannot wait to play on Sunday. But I don't think he is running back one yet. I think the Bucs still have some aspirations with Rachaad White. They hope that he can kind of fit into this run game a little bit more. He's proven to be a threat in the pass game. He's a good pass-catching back, but I think the Bucs are still holding out hope that, the offensive line can ultimately open some more things up for him as well, because that matters just as much. But I think before the end of the year, I think within the next 3 or 4 weeks, you're going to see Bucky Irving come out on the other side of these games with more carries than Rachaad White. Because at the end of the day, we can talk about the scheme, the new offensive system, whether or not they're running out of a 2-back set, whether it's a gap run, a zone run. We can break all of that down. But, I mean, when you watch it with your eyes, Bucky Irving is definitely the more explosive runner. So I don't think it happens this week or next, but he will eventually start to work his way into this game plan. And I hope that if they can fix this run game before the end of the year, he's going to have a lot to do with it, because I like what I have seen so far from this guy out of Oregon.
3 guys who are big names on the Bucs offense will probably all play today, but they're less than 100%. Rhett, those would be Mike Evans, Chris Godwin at receiver, and then Tristan Wirfs at offensive tackle. Among those 3, who is the most important for the Buccaneers? One of the 2 wide receivers, playmakers, or their big offensive tackle, Rhett?
I think the easy answer here would be Mike Evans, just because he hasn't been a huge facet in the game plan for the Bucs these last couple of weeks. Chris Godwin has been the team's leading receiver so far this season. He's kind of having a return to form in a contract year, so good for him. But the performance of this offensive line, I know Baker Mayfield got some happy feet last week and caused a couple of sacks, but they were shorthanded. They did not have right tackle Luke Goedeke. He was going through concussion protocol and was not able to be cleared in time for last week's game. Now, he did practice this week. He was able to show up and go out there full speed with the team, so I think he should be good to go. It's going to be great to have him back in the lineup for Tampa Bay, but I want to say Tristan Wirfs just because of the performance of that offensive line. I think Tristan Wirfs definitely has not played to the standard he set for himself so far this season. I think a lot of fans are kind of wondering when Tristan Wirfs is going to show up. So I know he's not 100%, but he's probably still the most important piece of that offensive line, because they're struggling in the interior, and without Luke Goedeke on the right side, they've been struggling over there as well sometimes in some of these one-on-one matchups with Skule, the backup right tackle. So I think Tristan Wirfs is the most important name. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, honestly, limited week at practice for those guys. I'm kind of looking at just veteran maintenance days. Obviously, some nagging injuries going to pop up in the NFL, but I expect both of them to be fine. I'm hoping the Bucs can get Mike Evans involved in the game plan this week, because like I said, he really just hasn't been out there. But when you give me those 3 names, I think the big left tackle has to be priority number 1, because this Buccaneers offensive line has got to do a better job of protecting Baker Mayfield this week.
Rhett Matthew from Cannon Fire Podcast here on a big matchup a few hours away in Tampa between the Eagles and Bucs. Philly on the road a small favorite, in part because some of these injury concerns about the Bucs today. Doesn't look like Calijah Kancey is going to play on that defensive line. Antoine Winfield Jr., one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL, also questionable for this game, which leads me to the biggest question here. Rhett, small underdog. Do you expect the Bucs to win the game against the Eagles this afternoon? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes, I do. I ultimately think that so far this season, when the Bucs have played up to form, they are the better team. I want to believe that this team has turned a corner. Again, it's hard to not have a sour taste in your mouth after the Denver game and the way that they performed, or lack thereof. But I want to believe that this team knows what they're capable of. And I think if they show up prepared and the game plan goes well, they match up pretty well against the Eagles. They've won their last 5 out of 6 whenever they play Philly. So I like the Bucs' chances this weekend. So if they're an underdog or not, I'm taking the Bucs here.
Rhett, Matthew here. My producer did want to know, though, do you think Winfield, if he's out for sure, is just a monster loss?
I think it is. It is in a couple of different ways. I think for the Buccaneers pass rush, I know that sounds kind of weird because he's, playing out of the secondary, but Todd Bowles, It's been no secret how creative he likes to get with these blitz schemes and defensive fronts that he's showing a lot of different quarterbacks. And I think Antoine Winfield Jr. adds just enough juice to help this pass rush that has been struggling so far through these first 3 games. So I think it is a big loss anytime you miss a playmaker as capable as Antoine Winfield Jr. But, the guys have been stepping up in his absence, Christian Izien and especially Jordan Whitehead. Both of those guys are sure-handed tacklers. I think if they are sent after the quarterback, they will be able to get the job done. But I think, there's definitely a couple of pieces on this defense that there's not going to be a lot they can do to make it better until those guys get back. Vita Vea and that defensive line, a big question mark this week. Until he's back at a full-time capacity, this pass rush is just going to have to make do. So Todd Bowles gearing things up on the blitz, getting creative, and sending his secondary after the quarterback, I think is going to be a big part of the game plan this week. And without Antoine Winfield, it's going to be tough.
Rhett Matthew, Cannon Fire Podcast. Bucs fans out there and sports bettors looking for Bucs information, that's where you got to go. Rhett, thank you for coming on FanDuel's More Ways to Win Radio. We appreciate it.
Andrew, appreciate you, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Be back with more right after this.